Hello guys and welcome back to this fifth episode. I know I've been gone for a while. In case you haven't watched any previous videos, it's okay, you can still benefit from this video where you're gonna learn about creating a global error handler in our application. We're gonna be using the try catch block, we're gonna throw an error, we're gonna see how to improve the way we're throwing that or like improve the way we're handling that error. So stay tuned. Just to remind you quickly of our structure, we have the server.js file here, which is the entry point of our application. We have the .env, a file where we have our environment variables, where we can read them from the config file. We have our controllers, of course, we have the routes. Each route has an endpoint, the method for our REST API. We are using the validate middleware. Of course, we have a validation folder where we have our validations for the requests. Mostly we're using it for the body of the request. The controller will be calling a certain service, so we have the services folder in which we have the services. We're using Mongoose. Our database is MongoDB. We have the models folder in which we have the Mongoose schemas and models, and that's pretty much it. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create a middleware folder. So let's go ahead and say middlewares, and inside this folder we're gonna create the first file, or the only file in it in this video, which is gonna be error handler. Of course, we shouldn't forget .js. So here I'm gonna create a function. We can call it error handler. This function is gonna take an object first, which is error. It's gonna take the request, the response, and then we can say next. And inside of this function, what we're gonna do is we're gonna format the response in a certain way. So usually when we have an error, we return a status, which is the status of the response, which kind of helps you know what kind of error it is. So usually the 400 errors are errors done from the user side. The 500 is the internal server error, and so on. And of course you can create your own custom errors. The first thing we're gonna do is set the status of the response, so res.status. And here we're assuming that this error object that we're passing is gonna have a status and a message. So here we can read the status from that object. We can say error.status, and we can also add this or. So in case this is undefined or null or empty, we can instead set our own error. It's gonna be 500, assuming it's a server error, and then res.send. So here we're sending the response, and we can say, for example, we can, by the way, format it the way we want. Let's create a JavaScript object. Let's say error true, since here we caught an error in our error global handler, and then we can set the message. And here as well, of course, we don't need the marks here, but we can still put them. And here we're gonna pass in whatever message we are receiving from the error object. So we can say error.message, and just like we did before with the or, this operator here, we can do the same and have a default message in case we don't have a message coming from our error object, and we can say internal server error. Now, to be able to use that in different files, what we can do is, and what we should do is, say modules.export equal, and then error handler. So now we can use it in different files. We can import it. Of course, since we wanna use this middleware, we need to register it and put it someplace. So here, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna import it. I'm gonna create a variable. Let's call it error handler, and then require that file. This in our middlewares and error handler file. And now to add this middleware, and be careful here, the ordering is very important, the middleware ordering, and I've said that in a previous video. We need to have our route middlewares before the error handling middleware, because the ordering matters. These get executed one after the other. So in case we're throwing an error from the book router, for example, from the book routes, is gonna come down when we use the next function, and it will be caught in a different middleware. It will go through the middlewares one after the other depending on the order here. That's why we need it here. So error handler, as you can see. Okay, now let's see our middleware in action. Let's go, let's say, to our book controller, and here let's use try catch. So let's say, okay, get book by ID. What we used to do is we used to call the service which gets our book, our single book, using the ID coming from our query, and then if we have a result we send it. If we don't have a result, we just send a string which says error. Of course that's not what we want. What we want is to send this custom error here, which is handled in our global error handler. So here, instead of having this, we're gonna use the try catch block. So first let's say try, we open the curly braces, let's put this piece of code here, and here of course we need to send the response, so res.send result. And typically when you try something and any error occurs here for some reason, we need to catch it. So let's say catch error, which is gonna be the argument, the error caught in somewhere in this try block, and then what we can do for now is log that error. And of course we're not just gonna log it here, we're gonna throw it to the next middleware and we're gonna catch it in our error handler. I don't know if you realize, but I've made an error here in the error handler. It should be module.exports and not modules.export like I wrote it. Okay, so back to our book controller. As we said here, we have a try catch block and we're catching any error that is produced in those line of codes here. So typically the error is going to be thrown from the service that we're calling, in this case the getBookById service. So here we are using an aggregation. If you want to know more about aggregations, you can read the MongoDB documentation. Basically the aggregate function takes an array of stages, and the ordering of the stages matter. So for example here we're filtering the records inside the DB to only find the ones matching whatever criteria we pass in here. Here we're searching by ID, and then we're looking up. This is like join if you know SQL, so we're getting data from a different collection. To make it a bit easier, if we take a look here in our books collection, for example, the author, we don't have any actual readable data for the client, so we only have the ID. So by using the lookup stage, by using the lookup stage, we're looking up this table right here, or this collection right here, and we are fetching this data instead of this ID right here, and so on. And here we were returning the result, and of course the aggregation function returns an array of results, but since we're only fetching by ID, which is unique, we're only gonna get one item, which is gonna be stored in the first index of that array. So here right now what our code does is that in case we don't find anything, we don't find the actual ID, we're just gonna return nothing, and that's not what we want. And to portray that, let's go ahead and say nodemon server. Of course you need to have nodemon installed to use nodemon, and then here let's use postman and make an API call, and I'm gonna pass in a wrong ID, we don't have this book, and when I send, as you can see, we have nothing here. Instead what I want to say is 404, and then I want to have error true, and I want to show the message saying that no books were found. So the first thing here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna check if we have any result. So if result, which is gonna check if this is empty or not, if it exists or not as well. And let's say and result dot length is bigger than 0. So we're checking that the array actually contains an element. If that's the case, we're gonna return the result. Else, so in case we don't have anything, let's check that it's going through that else, by the way. So we can say we can log it. I'm gonna save, and now if we try this again and go back to our console, as you can see we are inside this else block. So here what we're gonna do now is we're gonna throw an error, and whenever we throw an error, as we said previously, inside our try catch block, the error thrown will be caught here in this block, and then we can do whatever we want with this error. For now we're just gonna log it. So here let's throw a new error, and this error class here is provided by Node.js. We haven't installed anything else, so for now we can say not found. I'm gonna save this, and now if you run this again, okay, of course we are not returning anything and program does not stop, and this is the actual behavior now, because here we are logging the error and we're not returning anything. We don't have a return, we don't have an X, we don't have anything. But as you can see, it actually logged the error for us. It executed this part of the code inside the catch block. The error is not found, and that makes sense because that's the error that we actually threw here. But now let's do something else. Let's write a code that let us make use of our error handler here. So instead of just logging the error now, we're actually gonna make use of our next function. Like I said previously, the next function is gonna go to the next middleware. So I'm gonna say next, and then here we can pass in whatever data we need. So you might ask yourself, where does this go? And if you go back to the server.js file, let's say we were in this middleware, we went to the book router middleware, executed, let's follow the flow, we went to the controller, and the service we threw an error. So back in our controller we caught that error, and now we said next, so we are going to the next middleware. Back in our server.js, the request is gonna go to the next middleware, but here it doesn't match any route inside the author.router, like no routes is matched, so it's gonna keep going to the next middleware, and here the error handle middleware is gonna be executed. We also added this error parameter, so we need to pass in another argument with a status and with a message. And of course, if we don't pass those, we have set some default values such as 500 internal server error. So inside this next function here, we're gonna pass in an object which has the status and the message. So here, if we do not add any conditions, we just type that and we set anything here, every caught error will have the same status and the same message, and that's not what we want. We need to check what type of error we have, and if you recall, the error that we set is not found. So let's check here if error, which is this caught argument here, dot message equal not found. In that case, we are gonna pass in a status which is 404, and our message, let's just say book not found. Else we can call next, say status 500, and message we can keep it empty. I'm gonna save, and now in Postman, if we try to send, as you can see, we have received the custom message or the custom error, the custom response that we have created inside the error handler. So we have the status which is coming from the error. Here we set it to 404 in case the error message thrown is not found. And if we take a look here, status 404, we have the error, we have our own custom message. Let's improve our code and make it better. But first, just to recap a bit, the steps that we went through is, the first step, we have created our middleware folder. We have created our first middleware function, which is error handler. Here we have an error object. Of course, we have the request, response, and next that we always pass in. And the first step we did was we set the status of our response. It takes the status passed by the error object, or if we don't have a status for some reason, we can set a default value which is 500, and then we have modeled the response in whatever way we wanted. Here we added an error, true. We don't have to add that, of course. We also added another field which is called message, and we passed in the message coming from the error object. And as well, if we for some reason we don't have a message here, we set our default message to be internal server error. Now, to make use of this middleware, of course, we need to register it in our program. So we imported it after exporting it here, and then we set it at the bottom so that our middlewares, our request, go through the route middlewares first, and then it can go to that error handler middleware in case we actually call the next function in any of our controllers. We just use it in our get book by ID function, just to show you how it's done. We have used the try catch block, so the program will try to execute everything inside the try. If it works, we send a result. If any error is thrown for any reason, then we are catching that error, and for now we are checking the type of message so that we can set our custom message and status. And here inside of our service, we checked that in case we don't have any result, we are going to return an error which has the message not found. Let's go ahead and create a new folder, and let's call it error messages or errors, and let's create the book.js file, and here we're gonna have our errors as JavaScript objects. So let's go ahead and import them. Module.exports equal, and here we're gonna have keys, and each key is gonna be the actual error or the actual error message that we're gonna be throwing. So for example here, not found is gonna be a key which has as a body or as a value a JavaScript object which consists of a status and a message. So let's go ahead and create the first field. It's gonna have status of 404 and a message of book not found. Let's save. Now whenever we have more errors in our apps, we can handle them here. We can have any error we want. For example, username exists, let's say, and so on. You get the point. So here we would have our errors. Now back in our controller, we no longer need if-else blocks, and this is not very good having if-else blocks, because let's say we had 5 different errors. Let's say here we had some business rules that have different error cases and we are throwing different errors. We would have a long chain of if-else blocks here. So instead of this right now, what we can do is let's import the error messages file, const, let's say book errors equal require, and side error messages book. Now what we can do is in get book by ID, when we catch an error, we use this book errors which contains the keys of our errors, and if you recall, to get that key that we are throwing here in the service, to get it right here, it's the error.message field. So what we need to do here is, of course, we need to call the next function, and the next function takes an object which is status and message. So the status is gonna be this one right here for not found. To get that, we're gonna do books errors. We're gonna pass in the key. The key is gonna be the error.message, because if you recall previously, the error that we're throwing has the message not found, whatever string we pass in for the error instance that we have created here and we are returning here. So dot status, this will let us get the status from here, and for the message we're gonna do the same thing, but this time instead of reading the status, we're gonna be reading the message. And do not get confused, this message right here is coming from this error that we caught, which is coming from our service, which is this one. This is the first message, the error.message, and this message is the field that we have created here. So here, if we had error message, for example, of course we would need to change that to .error message. So don't confuse between those two. That way, whenever we throw an error, we no longer need to check which type of error it is. We no longer need the if-else block, because we are gonna search in our errors here. What if we don't have that error? What if we do not have it? It's not a problem, because here we said that if we don't have a value, we're gonna set the default values. Let's go ahead and test that out in Postman, send, and as you can see, we still have the same error. It's still working. Now let's say we were throwing a different error in our service, so let's say some other error, and in our controller we caught that, we pass in the error message to the box error, but we do not find this field because we do not have it. The code won't run like that, and we need to handle it. So if we go ahead and say send, as you can see, cannot read property of undefined reading status, and that's because the box error does not have a field error.message, because error.message is, in this case, some other errors which is nowhere to be found here, so it's undefined. And of course you cannot read the status on the undefined object, because undefined does not have a status field. The fix is very easy. All we have to do is add an interrogation mark before the .status and before the .error messages, which means that those fields can be nullable. They can have a value of undefined, and of course we are handling the undefined values here by setting those default values after this operator right here. So now if we open Postman and press send again, as you can see, we are handling the internal server error, and here we can see 500. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment. This really helps. Also, thank you for more than 500 subscribers. I know I've been lacking when it comes to uploading videos, but I'm trying to find and balance my time between real life work and YouTube. So a like and a subscribe would really motivate me to keep going, and see you next time. Thank you for watching.